Well, greetings from Bethel Baptist Chapel here in Holywell in North Wales. We're starting our study again this evening. We're in the book of Joshua. We're making a little bit better progress now, and hopefully we'll get through this book tonight. But in the first 5 books, these are known as the Law, and now we're turning a corner. The next books that we're going to be studying from Joshua all the way through the book of Esther will be books of history. They're kind of grouped together in our Bibles. So we're going to be in a long stretch here where we'll be looking at history. Yes, there's other elements in these books. There are prophetic elements, there are liturgical elements even, but mostly these are considered books of history for us. So in our book, we're on page 41. I'm going to shift glasses now. Got that point in life where just that little bit extra magnification helps. So the book, so again, the 5 books of Moses, Genesis through Deuteronomy, we see the nation or the children of Israel. That term is used quite often, though, in the text. The children of Israel were led up to Canaan, and Joshua will now be leading the children of Israel into Canaan. And so the remainder of the historical books will cover Israel's history inside the land. And again, that'll be Joshua through Esther and everything in between. The author is Joshua, and some may debate that it was not penned by his own hand, but regardless, he, at the very least, he would give the words of substance to a scribe who wrote it. As we break this down, 3 big moves we'll see in this text. We'll see the first 5 chapters will be really the preparation for entering the land. We'll get into the details where Joshua will be now the leader, and they will prepare themselves to go in and take over the land. Chapters 6 through 12 will be overcoming the land or conquering the land, as some outlines will have. And then the final will be occupying the land. It's one thing to conquer, and what we'll find is they defeated the big pieces, and there's not a part of the land in the various regions where they did not conquer the big cities, but there's still pockets that had to be dealt with. But the big work was done by the nation en masse. The individual tribes should have been a mop-up job for that. And of course, in that vein, one of my favorite characters in the Bible, good old Caleb. He wanted that mountain, and he's going to get his mountain, and he will deal with those on that mountain. So the structure is that to chapter 24, and then we'll have Joshua leaving the scene, as it were, of the final challenge to the nation there. The central message of the book of Joshua is the victory of faith. Joshua 1:5, 1:9, and 3:17. I'll take the first 2. If someone wants to kind of look ahead to 3:17, we'll keep it moving along. But 1:5 says, there shall not any man be able to stand before thee all the days of thy life, as I was with Moses, so I will be with thee. I will not fail thee, nor forsake thee. God's reminding Joshua, I was with Moses, I'm going to be with you. Be faithful. Is the implication there. Verse 9. Have not I commanded thee? Be strong and of good courage. Be not afraid, neither be thou dismayed, for the Lord thy God is with thee, whithersoever thou goest. Anyone want to take the chapter 3?
And the priests that bare the ark of the covenant of the Lord stood firm on dry ground in the midst of Jordan, and all the Israelites passed over on dry ground, until all the people have passed clean over Jordan.
Yeah, that's going to take faith on many parts there, but the priests stepped into the water before the water stopped flowing, but when their foot got to the water stopped flowing, and they were able to go over on dry ground. Victory there. So the lesson in Joshua proclaims the New Testament truth, or I could just think of the hymn, faith is the victory that overcomes the world, but this is the victory that overcometh the world, even our faith, 1 John 5:4. In this section, our author notes there's many types and symbols in Joshua and in the Pentateuch, again, those first 5 books, but we don't have time to delve into those. There's actually, you can get books on typology, and I've taken college courses on typology before, but just as a note there, Joshua, by the way, means Jehovah is salvation. What other name in our Bible is like that?
Jesus.
Jump in, Mrs. Campbell.
Jesus.
Jesus. it is the same name. And it's interesting, in Hebrews, just a little note, in Hebrews 4:8, you'll read along and it says, and Jesus, did not let them have their rest. Well, that Jesus, it makes no sense in the context. It's really Joshua. So the one time we see Joshua's name in the New Testament, it's rendered in the Greek form, which is Yesi, and Jesus, depending on what's the suffix on it. And in Hebrews 4:8 actually refers to Joshua. Jesus, by the way, in the New Testament means Jehovah's salvation. It's the same name. It's just rendering it from the Hebrew to English or Greek to English. So indeed, our salvation came after Moses. And so John 1:17. I think cue that one up. John. You got
The
it?
law was given by Moses, but grace and truth came by Jesus Christ.
There you go. So, glad we're under the covenant of grace. So he'll note that there's a remarkable parallel, and some of it's by contrast, a remarkable parallel between Joshua and Ephesians. In Joshua, we see Israel entering and possessing an earthly inheritance that was promised to Abraham, given to Abraham. In Ephesians, we'll see the church entering and possessing the heavenly inheritance given to us in Christ. And both will have things to overcome. We have things to overcome will be the point. We'll talk about that more as we go through it. So chapters 1 to 5, it's entering the land. And the first part we'll see, we read a little bit of that. Joshua will be commissioned for leadership in chapter 1. And his authority was based on nothing less than the Word of God. We read Joshua 1. Pretty much I'll read down through verse 9 in its entirety. Verse 6, so be strong and of a good church. I already read verse 5, so we'll continue on there, right? John. Yeah, so let's continue on. So verse 6, be strong and of a good courage, for unto this people shalt thou divide for an inheritance the land. They're going into the land, but they've got to figure out how to divide it up, which I swear to their fathers to give them. Only be thou strong and very courageous, that thou mayest observe to do according to all the law, which Moses my servant commanded thee. Turn not from it, to the right hand or to the left, that thou mayest prosper whithersoever thou goest. This book of the law shall not depart out of thy mouth, but thou shalt meditate therein day and night, that thou mayest observe to do according to all that is written therein. For then thou shalt make thy way prosperous, and then thou shalt have good success. And we finished up with verse 9 before. So what is real success there in verse 8? Meditate and do. If he does it, then he'll be prosperous. Don't add to it, don't take away from it, don't go to the right, don't go to the left. Kind of the thoughts there. And so name the steps. Here's a good one. So what are the steps to success in verse 8?
You just say meditating.
Yep, meditate day and night on it.
And if you do that, your way will be made prosperous.
Observe
Obey
to
it, yeah.
do according to all that is written.
Yeah.
Talk about a sermon outline. Hint, those men that are thinking, man, if I were ever to do a sermon, where would I get a sermon outline? There's your little 3-point sermon right there. You want to have a successful Christian walk, have a good story. How about athletes? They learn the rules, then they play the game, they get good at the game. Well, let's bring it into our spiritual life. Let's look at the book of Joshua. Actually, Joshua, a lot of people will use Joshua as a book of leadership because he has good characteristics, and you look at what he does follow God, and he does turn to God. And and how he does things are wonderful precepts in literature and leadership, but we will not go there. But it is these first 5 chapters that those really come out. Okay, so we saw that. So immediately though, the big thing, they're still they're in the plains of Moab. They're on the east side of the Jordan River, and the first thing they are going to encounter going across is Jericho. And so Joshua will send 2 spies to Jericho, again, key city, going across there. Some will say, well, gee, if you have the face of God, you'll just kind of leap into the abyss. And if God tells you to leap into the abyss, then you leap into the abyss. But there's nothing wrong with gathering some intelligence and God gives us a brain, let's use it, so it doesn't degrade or do away with his faith. And I like his point here. True faith does not despise the use of means, because there is a wide difference between believing and presuming. And so he believed, and he went, and what they will hear because of this, they'll hear, they'll be encouraged. He'll probably read some of that. Joshua 2, 11 and 12 and 18. We'll see. So what happened? So 2, 11 and 12. And as soon as we heard, this is going to be someone in the land is talking up these things. And as soon as we heard these things, our heart did melt. These are the people of Jericho. Neither did there remain any more courage in any man because of you. For the Lord your God, he is God in heaven above and earth beneath. Now therefore I pray you, swear to me by this Rahab, I guess talking, by the Lord, since I have showed you kindness, that you will also show kindness unto my father's house, and give me a true token. And so the introduction is there. You don't need the internet for news of travel. I think we've learned that. I've learned that in my time in Wales. You don't need to be. If someone can drop a glass on over on the east side of Holywell, well, they know about it on the left side of Holywell, and whose dog got nicked in that. These things happen in those days. Certainly, a large nation of people marching around for 40 years was probably spoken of a little bit. And so they know of it. They know they're camped out across the way, and they know they are coming that way. So verse 18 will be the wrap up here. So behold, when we come to the land, thou shalt bind this line of scarlet thread in the window, which thou didst let us down by, and thou shalt bring thy father and thy mother and thy brethren and all thy father's household home unto thee. I like this. The scarlet thread, you think of the scarlet thread, something thin, right? That's some really strong stuff that they're able to lower these men down off of it on the side of the building. So it was a piece of rope. But the promise will be you hang that scarlet thread there, and no one's gonna harm anyone that's in that house. And again, this is a time where they would build up against the inside wall. That was, at least you have one of your walls built for you. We've seen this one around Carnarvon. They used to build around the outside. So you got at least one wall already done. And so their house was built into the side of the town there. So they will come in. They will. Well, I guess that's just the spies report. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. So chapter 3. I like the way he puts it. They are at a crossroads. This is a critical moment for Israel. Same position that their parents were in. And God says, just go in and take the land. And they're like, they're too big for us. And here they're looking at Jericho, a mighty fortified city. And so it's 40 years later. And now they were to move. They're to be led by the priests and the Levites. And God would work miracles if they would just follow him. Joshua 3, 5, 13, and 17. Does anyone want to read those verses?
And Joshua said unto the people, sanctify yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you. And then 13.
And let's start with the 3:3. So 3, 5, 13, and 17.
Oh, 3, 5, 13, 17. Okay. And they commanded the people, saying, when ye see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God, and the priests, the Levites, bearing it, then ye shall remove from your place, and go after it. And Joshua said unto the people, sanctify yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you. And it shall come to pass, as soon as the soles of your feet of the priests that bear the ark of the Lord of all the earth, shall rest in the waters of Jordan, that the waters of Jordan shall be cut off from the waters that come down from above, and they shall stand upon an heap. And the priests that bear the ark of the covenant of the Lord stood firm on dry ground in the midst of Jordan, and all the Israelites passed over on dry ground, until all the people were passed clean over Jordan.
So, indeed, they would see a miracle. And these verses teach us, it's one thing to be brought out of Egypt of sin, but it's another thing to trust and obey the total word of God. They had to, certainly the priests, I think, had the most to lose there by stepping in. I think the other way that's been put is it's one thing to be brought out of Egypt, but we need to get Egypt out of us. Is kind of the contrast there. an interesting little thing they did back then is they would set up a memorial, and so they will not forget what God has done. There's a miracle. And some will use, by the way, to think of this, it's not. I don't think they went over single file, because it's been a long time for that whole group to get over. So they probably crossed at a fairly wide spot, for what it's worth. Just personal opinion when you think about that event. Some people will say, well, if they cross single file and there's 5 million people, it would have taken 3.2 days for them to do it. But it didn't have to be single file. Anyways, I just say that because I've had that thrown at me before. But you want to remember what's happened there. In chapter 4, the Lord spake unto Joshua, and basically God's going to say, this is something you want to remember when you're in the land. And by the way, this is right on the border of Israel proper. Let's remind ourselves of what's happened here. And so they'll make a memorial in the Jordan River, verse 9, and a memorial at Gilgal. And we'll see verses 3 and 19. And each memorial was made up of 12 stones. A representative from each of the tribes would grab a stone. And these memorials reminded them of the power of God in holding back the waters and the faithfulness of God in bringing them into the land. This is a big moment. This is the big promise. You were slaves. One of the signs is going to be you're going to go into the land. And they're going to be, God is faithful to bring them into the land. And just a little side for us to think, can you name a memorial which we observe, speaking of our salvation?
When they made the memorial of 12 stones, was it a stacked one, or was it like Stonehenge? Or
I think they were stacked on each.
I couldn't find out.
Well, let's read it. In my mind, it's like a stack. But I'm sure not the 12. I'm sure 6 and 4 and whatever. And then it'll be the same when they get to Gilgal. Let's see what they say. Verse 3. It says, command ye them, saying, take ye hence out of the midst of the Jordan, and out of the place where the priest's feet stood firm, 12 stones, and ye shall carry them over with you, and leave them in the lodging place where ye shall lodge this night. And then verse 19. And the people came up out of the Jordan on the 10th day of the first month, and encamped in Gilgal on the east border of Jericho, and those 12 stones which they took out of Jordan, to Joshua pitch in Gilgal. Didn't they also put stones in the midst of Jordan? Didn't they?
That's what I thought, but it just says it, put them in
There we
the
go,
lodging
verse 9.
place. Okay.
Yeah, it's probably worth reading. And Joshua set up 12 stones in the midst of Jordan, in the place where the feet of the priests which bear the Ark of the Covenant stood. And there they are to this day. You go down and look at them, I guess. Don't know where that is. It'd be interesting to see what happened to those stones. Okay. Circumcision. So we're going to have the seal of the covenant. They've come over. They're now we're in the promised land. The seal of the covenant needs to be performed on these folks. Well, we'll find out something. The children born during the 40 years of wandering were not circumcised. For what reason, I'm not sure. And that'll be bad. So now looking at the seal of the covenant, so they will, against Deuteronomy 10:16 is basically a sign of that. Someone want to grab that, and someone else take Deuteronomy 36. Stephen takes 36, and
Deuteronomy, what chapter is?
so 13 verse 6, and Steve, Mark, if you take 10:16, I'll take Colossians 2.
13 verse 6, you said. I think.
30.
30,
Deuteronomy
verse
30.
6.
3-0.
Verse 6?
Well, 10:16. Did you have that, Mark?
Yeah. Circumcise therefore the foreskin of your heart, and be no more stiff-necked.
So there is one that is a sign for the covenant, and the other one is kind of getting right with God. But go ahead, Steve.
And the Lord thy God will circumcise thine heart, and the heart of thy seed, to love the Lord thy God with all thine heart, and with all thy soul, that thou mayest live.
And getting into Colossians, where he kind of puts it all, those pieces together. well, we didn't get so much into the Abrahamic covenant requirement or the Mosaic covenant requirement, but here we go. Verses 11 through 13, it says, "In whom also you are circumcised with a circumcision made without hands, in putting off the body of the sins of the flesh by the circumcision of Christ, buried with him in baptism, wherein also you are risen with him through the faith of the operation of God, who hath raised him from the dead, and you, being dead in your sins, and the uncircumcision of your flesh, hath he quickened together with him, having forgiven you all trespasses." And so the memorial, I think, that we observe, speaking of our salvation, is going to be our baptism. It is, we kind of skipped over that letter D up above. But so the seal of the covenant, they will do that. And this is what did God just tell them all to do, or what did he tell Joshua to do? Observe the law. And here's Joshua. He just got over the line. Okay, it seems like we've forgotten something. Let's make sure this is right, and God has them do these things. So they're prepared to now. It's going to be a spiritual warfare. I mean, it's a nation of pagans, and so overcoming the land. So chapter 6 through 12. Chapter 6, the fall of Jericho. Again, we can go into all the details, but the Lord would do the conquering if Israel would do exactly what God commanded. They did, and Rahab will be saved. She will be grafted into the genealogy of Christ. Not on here, but nonetheless true. Verses 13 and 17 of chapter 6. Oops, I'm in the wrong part of the Bible. Does anyone have that handy?
And 7 priests bearing 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark of the Lord went on continually and blew with the trumpets, and the armed men went before them, but the rearward came after the ark of the Lord, the priests going on and blowing with trumpets. And 17.
Yep.
And the city shall be accursed, even it, and all that are therein, to the Lord. Only Rahab and Harlot shall live, she and all that are with her in the house, because she hid messengers that were sent.
So she'll be saved alive. By the way, it'll say, as of the time of the writing of Joshua, verse 25, it says she dwells in Israel even unto this day, because she hid the messengers which Joshua sent to spy out Jericho. Yeah, she's going to marry a good Jewish man. And we'll find that later as we move through time.
As with it there, what is the accursed thing?
Well, everything, basically, that whole city was to be basically God's. It was to be destroyed, and it was to be God's. That's why we're going to have the sin of Achan come up in the next chapter.
Verse 18.
Yeah. So, verse 18. Yeah, accursed, I'd like to see it. I think it was sanctified to God. And it was a pagan city, but everything was to be for God. And what will happen then is when you take the accursed thing and make a camp with it. So what will be the accursed thing? Well, we're going to find out with Achan. He saw a little wedge of gold. Hey, this will look good in my tent. And a couple of garments of clothes. These are pretty spiffy duds. And he takes those, and we'll find out. We'll get into that right now.
So basically, it was anything that you shouldn't have had taken out of it.
Nothing should have come out of it. The bottom line is nothing was to come out of there. And that was, obviously, it was a temptation. And there's nothing in this for personal gain. And the bottom, it's almost like the principle of the first fruits. This is the first city to go into the land, and it's God's. Guess what? There's going to be more cities. And in those other cities, they will have the chance to, basically, you're going to kill the people. What you got to note there?
Yeah, in the verse 17 says, "And the city shall be accursed, even it and all that are therein, to the Lord."
Yeah, except for Rahab and her family.
Only Rahab, the harlot, the family, yeah.
Yep.
So keep yourselves from the accursed thing as anything to do with Jericho.
So we get to chapter 7. So there we have God, very clearly laid it out. And but that word can be a good word, it can be a bad word. So 7 verse 1, "But the children of Israel committed a trespass in the accursed thing. For Achan the son of Carmi, the son of blah blah blah, took of the accursed thing, and the anger of the Lord was kindled against the children of Israel. And when they go to fight now, they had won, they get beat. And so we come out and we find out that there's sin in the camp. And so let's see, what verses does he want us to read? Verse 11 and 20 through 21. And the bottom line, I'm going to read from verse 10. And the Lord said unto Joshua, Get thee up, wherefore liest thou upon thy face? He's all upset that they got beat. He's like, get up and be a man. You got to get to the bottom of this. Israel hath sinned, and they have also transgressed my covenant which I commanded them. For they have even taken of the accursed thing, and have also stolen and dissembled, meaning lied, and they have put it even among their own stuff. Then we pick it up in verse 20 through 21. And Achan answered Joshua. They cast lots, and it eventually gets to Achan. And Achan answered Joshua and said, Indeed, I have sinned against the Lord God of Israel, and thus have I done. When I saw among the spoils a goodly Babylonish garment and 200 shekels of silver and a wedge of gold and 50 shekels weight, then I coveted them and took them. And behold, they are hid in the earth in the midst of my tent, and the silver under it. Ouch. So it was a basic thing. Started on the wrong foot, and sadly, Achan will be stoned. Verse 25. Israel stoned him with stones and burned them with fire after they had stoned them with stones, and raised over him a great heap of stone unto this day. And so the Lord turned from the fierceness of his anger. You can say death penalty for stealing, but it was stealing from God. And I think we've lost any sense. I mean, maybe this is too sweeping a generalization, but I think we've lost a lot of sense of holy reverence with God and sinning against God. It's very serious, and that's a good example of that, the sin of Achan. Conquest of the land, chapters 8 through 12. Now, after that sin they dealt with, now they're going to start winning. And they will then go back and defeat Ai, and they will defeat. It's interesting to take a map at this point as you're reading it. I would recommend you do that if you want a good map. I'll get you a good map. But you can see city by city the campaign he does, and it is just as he describes here. You can see it going through the central. They'll do a southern campaign, and then they'll do a northern campaign. And chapter 12 will give a summary of all the kings and the cities that fell in the hands of Israel. Chapter 11, 23 is in there. Again, this is a survey, so we're just kind of blasting through this. But I do recommend that as you read that, get yourself a good Bible map. 11:23, go on page. So, no, go ahead, Ryan.
So Joshua took the whole land according to all that the Lord had said unto Moses. And Joshua gave it for an inheritance unto Israel, according to the division of it by their tribes, and the land rested from war.
So, in reality, he'll talk about this later, but it's just a good point to drop it in. Were they all done at that point in time, at the end of the first conquest? The answer is no. There's still pockets that have to be dealt with. But from kind of a part representing the whole, they had conquered the big cities and the walled cities in these areas, and that's representative of the whole. Yes, there was a mop-up crew that had to go in. What are the words there? A gentleman has meticulously studied the survey, and indeed Joshua took the entire land as he promised. He had, in each of the areas, you have the coastal plain, the Shephelah, which are the foothills, the central plateau, the Jordan Valley, Transjordan Plateau. No area was bypassed. They went through as a nation, and they went through and they conquered, and there was just a matter of subduing others in the land. And then, so it is proper to say that. So occupying the land, looking at chapters 13 through 24. So the land would be divided amongst the tribes and the Levites. No simple task. Again, the Levites aren't going to get land per se of their own. They're going to be given sites around cities, a little sliver, as it were. We'll see that in chapter 13. The dividing of the land was by casting lots before the Lord. Now they do a survey of the land, so to understand what's there. But then they cast lots before the Lord to settle which tribes where He wanted them. And I don't know how it worked. But they said, okay, it's Judah's turn. Judah, here's what you get, or however they did it. And that they would get their piece of land on that. Remember that we have 2.5 tribes that said, we really like it over here. And he notes it here, we have Gad, Reuben, and half of Manasseh are going to stay on that Jordan plain there. They liked it. And again, they asked, we see that actually all the way going back to Genesis, but we see as they're marching right before this, that they like that bit of land. So, but 9.5 will go to the west side, and they'll be the ones given the proper division of that land. Let's see, letter C, mark well, the principle which governed Israel's occupation. We read Joshua 11:23, and compare it with Joshua 13:1. Joshua 13:1 says, now Joshua was old and stricken in years, and the Lord said unto him, thou art old and stricken in years, and there remaineth yet very much land to be possessed. So, yes, he had done it, but there's more that have to be done. And maybe the people aren't fulfilling their job to conquer all that was given to them. And I'll leave that alone. So, but the key passage, let's read all this here. Again, there's no contradiction in that. Again, the decisive blow had been struck. The leadership had been destroyed of those peoples that were there. And a good point in our lives, when we are converted, Satan's been destroyed. And certainly when Christ died on the cross, Satan's victory had eternally been taken from his hands. And when we receive Christ, Satan's victory over us is done. But we've got to work out, what does it say there in Philippians 2, to work out our salvation with fear and trembling. It's not whether we're going to be saved, but are we doing what we should be doing to have the victories that Christ would have us in our lives? So we have to take possession of that in this spiritual Canaan. And I think it is almost one want to make Canaan into heaven. It's not really heaven. It is because they're living a life. But it's a spiritual life and a new life that we need to be living. It is our saved life we're living. It's probably the best if you're looking at a type. Key passage here is in Joshua 21:43 to 45. to 45, and the Lord gave unto Israel all the land which he sware to give unto their fathers, and they possessed it, and dwelt therein. And the Lord gave them rest round about, according to all that he sware unto their fathers. And there stood not a man of all their enemies before them. The Lord delivered all their enemies into their hand, and there failed not aught of any good thing, which the Lord had spoken unto the house of Israel. And all came to pass. And again, we're emphasizing what God did. In fact, at the end of we'll talk about the end of Joshua's life, but when he gives his historical summary of what God had done to put them in the land in Joshua 24, that history lesson goes down there, and the Lord did, and the Lord did, and the Lord did. He did all those things. So, what are the three things that God gave to Israel? Kind of another little outline there. And he gave them all the land, 43. He gave all the land that he swore to give their fathers. And Abraham saw that land, and these people, this part of the nation get to accept it this time. He gave them rest. And he promised them that too. They followed him. They would have rest from their enemies. And he gave all the enemies into their hand. And the final thing there, another little 3-point outline. I like those things. And so what's that?
Good Baptist.
Good Baptist. 3 points in a poem. Well, that's getting a little flippant, but but these are little nuggets. So what do we see in Joshua 14:2 and 3? Well, it's about the division, and by lot was their inheritance, as the Lord commanded by the hand of Moses, for the 9 tribes and for the half tribe of Manasseh there. For Moses had given the inheritance of 2 tribes and a half tribe on the other side of Jordan. But unto the Levites he gave none inheritance among them. And we read verse... Nope, that's it. We stop right there. So we have with the tribes that are in the land proper. We've got 2.5 that are outside. And
Okay. Outside is on the west bank,
the east.
the east.
The east side of the Jordan River.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's always confusing when you talk about, you think about people coming from the west to the east, but it's actually the old east part of the world.
Yes.
No, it's
The
just
Far East.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is Middle East.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
It is confusing.
Cities of refuge, these will be enumerated and laid out there. There will be 6 cities of refuge, 3 on the west of Jordan, and 3 will be on the east. There again, a provision, a merciful provision to protect those that had committed sins of ignorance, inadvertent act. It was homicide, it was manslaughter, not homicide. They say if you're swinging an axe and the axe head flies off and kills somebody, run to the city of refuge and have it adjudicated by the priest, so the family doesn't kill you for killing their family member. So these sins of ignorance, mistakes, and unintentional wrongs, they will liken Christ to our city of refuge. And let's go to Hebrews. This is probably the best proof verse for this. But let's go to Hebrews chapter 6, verse 18. Is that right? Or is it Hebrews 6:8? We'll find out in a minute. Hebrews 6:18. Well, I'm pretty
I
sure.
got
it's
it.
right. You got it?
Yes. That by 2 immutable things in which it was impossible for God to lie, we might have a strong consolation, who have fled for refuge to lay hold upon the hope set before us.
I'm not going to try to pull all that apart because we're getting deep into that. But you see, what this is, by the way, this is the clearest proof verse I see of Christ being a type of the city of refuge. It's a little vague, but we know that we can, and what would they do when they got to that city of refuge? I think there were like little altars there. They would grab hold of the horns of the altar, supposed to be safe. And that's like, hey, you need to hear my case, you can't kill me here. And they would then hear the case. So we have that vision of just kind of coming and throwing ourselves on the altar as our refuge.
But only for the period of time that the high priest is in office. Then you have to
Yes, you're right. Yes, you've been reading your law. Yeah, well, and then you got re-adjudicated, and hopefully you can run really fast. Or you stay nearby. Part of it was you would live in that city as well. Okay, so Christ himself is our city of refuge. He does give a verse. I would say Hebrews 6:18. We could spend a lot of time in that verse. I'm not going to do it right now. Then we see Joshua's farewell, chapters 23 and 24. Probably the most significant part of that's going to be in chapter 24, and where he gathers all the tribes of Israel together. He knows he's leaving the scene. And this is a sign of a good leader here. He knows he's not going to be around much longer. And he's going to challenge them. Guys, we're in the land. They're living in the land. They've been there a bit of time. Don't forget our promise to God. And he says, let's go cut to the chase. Verse 14 to 24:14. Now therefore fear the Lord and serve him in sincerity and in truth, and put away the gods which your fathers served on the other side of the flood, and in Egypt, and serve ye the Lord. And if it seem evil unto you to serve the Lord, choose you this day whom you will serve. Well, this is to me the ultimate no. This is the ultimate duh. It's like, who are you going to serve? The gods which your fathers served that were on the other side of the flood that God crushed, or the gods of the Amorite whose land you dwell, who God just crushed. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord, because he crushed those other gods. He's the only true and living God. And I like that people answered and said, God forbid that we should forsake the Lord to serve other gods. So they do recommit at this point, but unfortunately we're going to get to the book of Judges, and that's not going to last real long. But Joshua did all he could in his earthly address. I guess they call us to those verses as well, that he did all he could to point them in the right direction. So what do you learn from these verses? God's better than. In fact, if you read the first part of 24, it's all that God does. This is a case, Bible studying point. If you ever get kind of lost, follow the verse. Follow the verbs. Verbs are where the actions. And so Joshua gathered, so you can see he brought them all together. And Joshua said to the people, thus saith the Lord God of Israel, your fathers dwelt on the other side of the flood. I took your father Abraham, verse 3, I took your father Abraham from the other side of the flood and led him throughout all the land of Canaan and multiplied his seed and gave him Isaac. You see all these actions are being done by God. And so you can emphasize that whole thing, and it's going to be God's resume. And God's resume is unimpeachable. And then he challenges them. Who do you serve? And we'll get kind of his epitaph there, Joshua 24:29. Actually, I cut you guys off. Anyone want to add anything else to that discussion? I've kind of drived it because I went long on the front end. Then we'll get this epitaph to Joshua 24:29. And it came to pass after these things that Joshua the son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, what a great title, died being 110 years old. They buried him in the border of his inheritance in Timnath-Serah, which is in Mount Ephraim on the north side of the hill of Gash. So I like that. Israel served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders that overlived Joshua, which had known all the works of the Lord that he had done for Israel. And unfortunately, the book of Judges isn't going to start out that way.
At least Joseph got buried alive.
Well, there you go. Yep, they brought Joseph's bones, and Joseph had the wisdom. Don't leave my bones here in Egypt. When you guys leave, take them. And they remembered. And all that was going on in the Exodus is kind of amazing that someone must have had Joseph's bones detailed to make sure that they went to the sepulchre or wherever he was stored there in Egypt and brought him up. Okay.
Hopefully his sons.
What's that?
Hopefully the tribes of his sons.
Yeah, one of the sons, descendants. So how do we remember? What's the central truth of Joshua?
It's always faith.
Faith. Faith is a victory that overcomes the world. And can you recall the three main divisions of the book?
Entering the land, overcoming the land, and occupying the land.
Yep. What was the name of the woman who hid the spies? Rahab. How did they cross the Jordan River into Canaan?
On dry land.
On dry land. I like that. And what was the memorial the Lord told them to make upon coming into the land?
A lump of stones.
12 stones, yep. And so that is the book of Joshua. So as you read it, you'll see the pieces kind of fall into place there. Hopefully it makes a little more sense.